All right, folks, and welcome back for another review of Fear of the Walking Dead. This is going to be episode 13 of season 6, titled JD, which if you've been keeping up, you know the JD is the initials John Dory, which are the initials on the guns that John would always carry. But man, after a heartbreaking episode last week, which a lot of people have been considered one of the best, if not the best, Fear of the Walking Dead episode to date, what will be in store for this episode? And I have to say that I can't take no more deaths or any reason to cry. I really can't. To be honest, I think I need another mid-season break like right now because things have been really tough, really difficult to process, and this has been an emotional time. I mean, come on now. They dropped that episode on Mother's Day, and I couldn't even tell you all that because it just would have been so predictable as to what was going to happen. But as you know in my reviews, there are no spoilers, just enough to get you hyped and prepared for this week's episode. And I have to say that after all the grieving last week, man, this episode really pressed some buttons, man. It really did. And considering everything that's went on with Grace and Morgan, just looking at Grace just broke me this episode. I can't imagine like that. Although she's a character, that what happened to her like resonates on just so many levels in real life. Whether you know somebody that's been through that or if you haven't, but you just can't imagine the feeling that anyone going through that or went through that must have felt. And just as a fan of The Walking Dead, Grace feels as real as any other person, and that's just a really tough cookie to swallow. But so with this episode, we get to again we're catching up with everything after last week's episode. So June, as we know, has been gone ever since she's killed Virginia, and the question is, where did she go? And did she go for good, or did she just throw a temper tantrum and went off for a day and came back? And what ultimately, is she good for gone, or is she just doing one of those type of things? And then also, too, her returning, well, what would that mean? Because there's a lot of different moving pieces here. Like, ultimately, what's her emotions with Dakota? And then you have to think on the other end, well, what's Morgan's and Grace's emotion towards her? Because they went after her in order to get help for Grace to deliver the baby. And you have to think, if June hadn't left, then they would have not had to go anywhere. Thus, the baby might still be alive. So there's a lot of different things happening there to really kind of consider the dynamics between these characters and what would it mean for them going forward. But ultimately, everyone's dealing with grieving with losses. Grace and Morgan with the baby, and then June with John. And it's just leaving a lot of characters devastated, but yet the other characters really trying to figure out how can they support these characters through their times. Well, that's where in this episode we see June essentially trying to make sense of everything, going to do her own investigation as to the looming danger that's still out there. And matter of fact, let me just read the synopsis really quick for this episode. June splits off from the group in efforts to gather any information to help stop an oncoming threat. Now, we know the oncoming threat is that underground community, the one who is spray painting all over the city. The end is the beginning. That's still out there, who's obviously, ran by Teddy, who we know Teddy has Aisha still. And so, June's trying to figure out, because she's aware, and obviously by being next to Virginia, she's aware that this danger still exists. So she's trying to find purpose with everything, and she needs to figure out what's going on with that. Not to mention, everyone feels that, or everyone knows that, the attack on Morgan and Grace ultimately came from them, and, because she mildly feels responsible for everything, then she's trying to just make do with everything. It's her way of trying to make peace with the situation. She's like, well, maybe this is my fault, but maybe if I can figure this out and help them, maybe this is a way to kind of, make things make sense and everybody just be okay. You know what I mean? Like that type of mentality. She's definitely in guilt for it. And so she feels like maybe, I can fix things by figuring out this group and whatnot. But at the same time, while that's, is a thing, Dwight is here to console, because we know the relationship with Dwight and June and John. But not only does Dwight goes to kind of console June in this situation, Sherry is with him, and it's weird because Sherry and Dwight have a really interesting relationship. Like, it's, you know how they're like at foes or they disagree, but like we see them stick together as a tandem. Like, they're detectives on this, and they are, you know, objectively trying to help June together, which is kind of weird because, you know, every single time Sherry gets a chance, she's like, "I'm gone, I'm leaving." She's running, and I think, you know, Sherry's ultimately running from something. I think she's, you know, running from the idea that she's just blaming everybody for the situation with Dwight, and she just doesn't really know where to go. So she's trying to kind of make inner peace herself with and make do with everything. And like, it's not really transparent, but like you can kind of really tell from her character, like she's just constantly running from everything. There's really no answer for her. Every time there seems to be a solution and Dwight presents something to her, she's like, no, and runs away. And you can tell she's just dealing with inner things. And that's probably a form of guilt as well. So, you know, you got her with guilt, you got June with guilt, and maybe Morgan even dealing with guilt. Who knows? But we get to meet Keith Carradine's character. Now, I ain't about to spoil nothing. I'm not about to spoil his name, his purpose, any of that. I'm not going to tell you his whether he's aligned with the group or whether he's at foes with the group. None of that. But go look on the internet because, you know, you never know what you may find. And people spoil things out here, apparently. But you never know. But I will say that very, very, very interesting. Very, very interesting. You remember that episode where John died, where Dakota ran over the walker and it was stuck between the tires, which I thought was like really, really awesome. Well, it seems to be a recurring thing in this season because we got another zombie stuck under a car, and I loved how it looked in that episode, and I felt like this one did it even better. I just had to throw that out there. But ultimately in this episode too, I mean, we, you know, with June, will we finally get to see June and will she read the letter that John left? Will we finally get to see her open it and reveal what was said in that letter? Because she's just been holding on to him. We don't know. But like the main objective of this episode is just really, where does everyone go from here? After the loss of the baby and the loss of John, everyone's grieving. People are at foes. There's tension. There's still looming danger out there. It's a lot to really put together, but I think the biggest thing to take from this episode is that a lot of these characters and us as well take a big message out of this episode, and it's forgiveness, and it's really learning how to provide forgiveness even in the most difficult situations such as loss and death. And I think that I love the theme in this episode. This episode was directed by Aisha Tyler, who I'm a fan of as well. And I just thought that this episode really told a really good message, but also really smooth things over after that super heartbreaking episode of last week. So I enjoyed this episode. I definitely tell you all, make sure you tune in for this Thursday on AMC Plus, and then Sunday on AMC. You don't want to miss out this episode 13 of season 6, JD. It's a really good episode for June. And again, you have to consider, you know, Grace and Morgan and just the devastation that they've been through. Where's their head at after this, and how do they move on? And we get to see a lot of that going on in this episode. And also that danger led by Teddy is still out there, and what will be next for them, and will the group be ready for them? So you get all that and more in this episode. So yeah, definitely check it out. Jump in the comments to let me know. And as always, folks, see you around for more reviews of Fear the Walking Dead.